When I saw the orange glow through the front windows, my stomach dropped so hard I thought I might collapse. Smoke curled around the roof like it had a mind of its own, suffocating the quiet street. My mother's small boutique, her heart and years of tireless mornings and late nights, was gone in flames, leaving nothing but blackened wood and a smell that burned my eyes. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was watch as the fire trucks arrived, hoses hissing, water hitting the fire in a futile dance. Life before that day had felt ordinary, comforting even. Mom had a rhythm, mornings at the bakery for cinnamon rolls, afternoons tending to her little shop with the neat rows of handmade jewelry, scarves, and tiny trinkets she collected over decades. Her laugh was soft but firm. Like she carried both warmth and authority in the same breath. Stepdad, always in the background, helped with the bookkeeping and bills, a quiet shadow at family dinners, never complaining, never interfering. I had trusted him. I had always trusted him. We were small but happy. Mom would hum while folding receipts, while I dusted the counters. The smell of her coffee, strong and bitter, mingled with vanilla candles she insisted on lighting every morning. I'd always thought that smell would be with me forever, a tiny anchor of home. But that day, all of that vanished in smoke. Before the fire, our days were simple, stitched together with small routines that felt like safety nets. Mom woke early. Already dressed in her soft aprons, hair tucked into a bun that never quite stayed perfect. The shop smelled like lavender and old wood, the bell over the door jingling every time a neighbor or tourist wandered in. I would sweep the floors, straightening necklaces and bracelets, listening to Mom chatter with her regulars, Mrs. Hanley, who always smelled faintly of mothballs and peppermint. Mr. Lewis, who came in for a single pair of gloves every December. Stepdad sat at the corner table, ledger open, pencil in hand, muttering numbers I pretended to understand. I never questioned him. He had a quiet way about him, one that made me feel safe, even when Mom's brows furrowed over the bills. I thought he was steady, reliable, part of the rhythm that made our little world hum. Evenings were soft. Mom would cook something simple, pasta with garlic, salad with too much lemon, and we'd eat around the small oak table, voices low, the radio humming in the background. I would watch her laugh, sometimes at nothing, sometimes at the silly stories I brought home from school. That laugh was a promise, a tether to all that was good and enduring. I never imagined it could be taken away, not by accident, not by anyone we trusted. Yet the ember of suspicion, small and almost invisible, would arrive before I knew it. And it would change everything. It started with little things, almost too small to notice. Stepdad came home later than usual some nights, claiming extra work at the office, though the stories never quite matched. He brushed off my questions with a shrug, his eyes calm but a little too steady. Mom never noticed, or maybe she chose not to. She had enough on her shoulders keeping the shop alive. Tending to customers, and balancing bills. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to keep that fragile sense of safety. Then came the paperwork. One evening, while helping Mom sort invoices, I noticed a stack of documents in his handwriting that didn't make sense. Policies I had never seen before. Numbers that seemed off. My fingers trembled as I touched the pages, a chill crawling up my spine. It could have been nothing. Maybe he was just organizing things differently. I told myself that over and over. Even in the smallest moments, unease crept in. The way he would linger near the shop at odd hours, claiming checking locks, though the doors were always double-bolted. The quiet phone calls he took in the garage, voice low, muttering words I couldn't catch. I tried to ignore it, even laughed it off when I mentioned it to friends. But the knot in my stomach would not loosen. And then, the fire happened. Watching the flames devour Mom's business, I felt a strange, hollow instinct stir inside me, a whisper I tried to dismiss. Something didn't sit right, and deep down, I feared I might already know the truth even before the smoke cleared. The smell of charred wood lingered for days, clinging to my clothes and hair like a cruel reminder. Mom wandered through the ruins, hands trembling, eyes red and hollow. I stayed close, holding her coat, listening to her mutter, "It's just fire, accidents happen," but her voice was cracked, fragile, and I could see through the veneer. I wanted to comfort her. But my own heart was a storm of suspicion I couldn't shake. I started looking closer at the documents I'd glimpsed weeks before. Stepdad's handwriting, neat and methodical, filled insurance forms that, at first glance, seemed routine. But then I noticed the policies, unusually large coverage, sudden additions just months before the fire. A slow, sick realization crept in. I traced dates, compared phone records, cross-checked bank statements. Everything pointed to him. And then, tucked behind a drawer in his study, I found the damning proof: emails to an unknown address, discussions of cash payouts, detailed instructions on timing. I confronted him in the kitchen, where the smell of smoke still clung faintly to the walls. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the anger and disbelief roiling inside me. "Why?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. "How could you do this?" He didn't look surprised. There was no remorse in his eyes, only that same quiet steadiness I had trusted. "It was for the best," he said, matter of fact, as though he were discussing the weather, not the ruin of a woman's life. My chest tightened, tears spilling freely. "For the best? For the best, you burned her dreams?" Words faltered between us, heavy and suffocating. I left the house that night, walking past the blackened frame of the shop, the cold wind biting at my cheeks, whispering a promise that I would find a way to fix what had been broken. I could not let this betrayal stand. Not for my mother. Not for the life she had built with her own hands. The next morning, I felt a quiet determination settle over me, heavier than grief, sharper than anger. I couldn't leave Mom in the haze of sorrow. I started digging deeper, retracing every step Stepdad had taken in the weeks before the fire. Receipts, bank transfers, emails, I went through them all, scribbling notes, connecting dots until the picture was undeniable. Every accidental expense, every late-night call, every insurance adjustment pointed to a plan he had orchestrated with meticulous care. I took a deep breath and went to Mom. She was sitting on the couch, eyes fixed on the empty space where her shelves once held tiny ceramic figurines. "Mom," I said gently, sitting beside her, "I need to show you something." Her gaze lifted, tired and wary. I laid out the evidence, explaining each step, each connection. Her hands trembled, clutching the edge of the coffee table as if it were a lifeline. "Why didn't you see it?" she whispered, voice breaking. I thought I knew him." I swallowed hard, squeezing her hand. "He's been lying, Mom. Planning this. But we can fix it. We'll make sure he can't hurt you again." We went to the police together, the weight of truth pressing against our shoulders, and I watched my mother reclaim a spark of her old courage. She gave her statement with dignity, voice steady despite the raw edge of pain. Stepdad was arrested, and the truth could no longer hide behind the smoke. In the quiet moments after the paperwork was filed, I saw her take a deep breath, finally allowing herself to feel the full spectrum of grief, relief, and righteous anger. And then came the hardest part: rebuilding. Mom refused to wallow in pity. She returned to her craft, to the shop she loved, piece by piece. I helped her, dusting counters, arranging displays, the smell of fresh paint and polish slowly replacing the scent of charred wood. Every hammer strike, every nail, every careful fold of new merchandise felt like a small victory, proof that betrayal could not define her life. In those days, I learned a truth I carry still: strength often grows quietly, in the spaces between despair and action. Watching her rise again, I understood resilience is not loud, it is steadfast, tender, and unwavering. Word spread slowly through our small town, first in whispers at the grocery store, then through the local paper. The story of Mom's shop, the fire, and stepdad's betrayal became public. I watched the community's faces, reading disbelief, sorrow, and finally, support. People who had admired her work for years brought meals, offered help, and shared memories of the little boutique that had brightened their days. Their kindness was a balm, softening the harsh edges of what had happened. When the court date arrived, I sat beside Mom, holding her hand through the long hours of testimony. Stepdad sat across the room, expression blank. A stark contrast to the weight of the truth laid bare. As each piece of evidence was presented, the policies, the transfers, the emails, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow. The betrayal was real, undeniable, and yet, in exposing it, we gave our story a new shape. The town rallied around Mom, her neighbors, friends, even casual customers showing up to help her rebuild. The press covered her courage, emphasizing her resilience rather than the scandal. I saw her shoulders lift with each supportive word, each gesture of solidarity. People spoke of honesty and justice, but also of redemption, not hers, not his, but the quiet justice of truth prevailing, of a life rebuilt despite betrayal. By the time Stepdad was sentenced, Mom had reopened a small, temporary version of her shop. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. The lines of worry on her face were softened by determination, and her laugh, cautious at first, began to return. We had endured the storm together, and while the pain never fully vanished, it transformed into something tangible, strength, clarity, and a new understanding of who we were as a family. In the quiet evenings, as we locked up the shop, the smell of fresh wood and paint replacing smoke and ash, I realized that the world could break you, but only if you let it. Mom refused to let it. And in that refusal, she found a freedom I hadn't expected. A proof that even the deepest betrayal could not steal the essence of her spirit. Rebuilding the shop became a ritual, almost meditative. Mom and I spent long hours sanding shelves, arranging displays, and unpacking new inventory. There was quiet laughter, too, the kind that creeps in slowly after grief, a subtle reminder that life still held light. The smell of varnish mixed with the faint scent of her lavender candles. And I realized that home, in its truest form, was not a building, it was resilience, determination, and love that refused to be extinguished. Mom never spoke much about Stepdad after the trial. She didn't need to. The court's verdict had spoken for itself. Instead, she focused on the present, her hands busy, her eyes steady. I watched her, noting the small changes, the way she paused to breathe before making decisions, the careful pride in her work, the renewed warmth in her smile. There was grace in her recovery, a quiet lesson in perseverance I would carry forever. And me? I learned to trust my instincts, to honor that small, persistent voice that had whispered something was wrong long before I had proof. I learned that courage is not always loud, it is choosing to act when fear is heavy in your chest, choosing to protect what you love, even when the world feels like it is crumbling around you. We didn't just rebuild a shop, we rebuilt trust, dignity, and hope. Mom's customers returned, slowly at first, then with eagerness. As if they could feel the heartbeat of the shop, and the woman behind it, once more. Life, as it always does, continued. But it carried a new depth, a sharper clarity. Betrayal can wound, yes, but it cannot define the soul that refuses to surrender. As I sit here now, in the quiet of the shop that smells of fresh paint and lavender, I often think about the lessons those days of fire and betrayal taught me. Life has a way of testing us in ways we cannot anticipate, placing us in the center of storms we never asked for. But within those storms, there is also clarity, if we are willing to see it. I watched my mother rise from ashes not just with courage, but with dignity. I learned that betrayal, even from someone we trust, does not have to define our story. Strength is quieter than we imagine. It is the steady hands rebuilding shelves, the patient listening to one another, the courage to face truth with grace. And hope is not a loud declaration, it is the small, persistent heartbeat that keeps us moving forward when the world seems dark. So I ask you, dear friends, if someone you loved betrayed you, could you find that quiet strength to rise again? Could you honor your truth without letting bitterness consume your heart? Tell me in the comments, my dear, what would your heart have done? And if my stories touch you, if you feel that warmth and reflection, I invite you to subscribe and walk with me through more tales of resilience, honesty, and the quiet power of the human spirit. Life is messy, beautiful, and full of lessons. We'll navigate them together.